Hi there, folks. Saber4 here with a nice big regional done out in Lille this week. We got a chance to see some new data to the meta, and so we're going to run through the recap and talk about a couple of things here and see what we've learned in the post-Django suspension. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with friends, do whatever it is you do. We're closing in on 750 subscribers and doing quite nicely. It has been amazing to see you guys join. I would very much appreciate it if you have not gone ahead and hit that button. In this video, we're going to talk about the Lille meta. We'll glance at Richmond, although I'm not going to show you hard numbers from there. But we'll talk a little bit about the combined numbers along with the trends. But we'll look at kind of a very big weekend for PQs. There were over a dozen of them. There are about 10 of them that were sizable enough that we really want data from them, which is to say that they're 30 people or more. And then we'll look at a couple of decks. We'll look at the Lille winner. We'll look at a Qi'ra Data Vault, and then a quick lesson in sequencing from a loot deck that I played today over at one of the tournaments here in Central Florida. So let's go ahead and dive on in. The early portion of the meta breakdown, and this is some of the data that we got out of competition on Saturday. Sabine Wren, 15% of the decks, almost all of them on Energy Conversion Lab. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but Sabine with Energy Conversion Lab was 132 decks, 15% of the total meta. Quinlan Voss Tarkentown, that combination, 10% of the meta. A big surge here for Qi'ra Data Vault. That jumped to 7%. Cad Bane Tarkentown with 5%. And then we have several others in the 3s and 2s before we drop down and kind of out of the way. They put the wrong Boba Fett in here, but that is Boba Fett 4 with Cunning. Anakin Skywalker on Colossus, Han Solo with Echo Base, so Han in green instead of Han in yellow. And then the Data Vault Darth Vader. So these are the major types that we saw when we were looking at Lille, and kind of what we would expect going in. This is kind of similar to what we saw last week. We saw actually an uptick here from Sabine from 10% to 15. Cad Bane bumped up just a little bit, bumping from 9 to 10. Some of the others took a big jump with Qi'ra. And Darth Vader, set 1 Darth Vader, took a pretty big jump. Han took a pretty big slide, and the rest of these have kind of stayed flat. But this is what we're seeing right now as far as if you're going to go sit down at a major tournament, instead of it being a 50% chance that you're going to sit in front of 2 decks, you've got a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to sit down in front of 3 different ones, or about a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to sit down in front of 3 different ones. So it's a much wider open set, and so needing to understand and occupy space for more decks and counters when you're going. As I said, it was a giant PQ weekend, and these are some of them. A couple of them are still in progress as I am recording this. I do know what is going to be in the final of one of these, but the rest of it are still a little bit up in the air. A trend that you notice here, Qi'ra Data Vault, beating Boss Blue, beating Cad Tarkentown, beating Han Data Vault, beating Darth Vader Yellow. She did take a loss to a Sabini CL. One of the bigger PQs out in Mission, Kansas, did not have full data as far as their finalists went, but they had 3 other Qi'ra Data Vaults that were in the top 8. Han won a tournament here. Yoda won one. The Newington is one of the ones that we don't have the final data from, but we do know that it is going to be a Rey deck versus a Qi'ra Data Vault, because it was a Qi'ra Data Vault mirror that's going to play into Rey. Of that, why I say that these are the ones that I kind of concern myself with. Here's the numbers that we have as far as just the player numbers. When we look at a PQ, there was a PQ this weekend, and somebody qualified out of a field of 5. And so, somebody got their pass into day 2 with 5 players. So we don't tend to look at a meta from a slice that's that small, just because you didn't have to play your way through a larger variety of decks. But what we did see in those that were about 40 players plus, Sabine pretty heavily present, Qi'ra on an uptick, but a wide and diverse meta. Talk about the trends here for a second. There is a lower conversion rate for Quinlan going into this weekend than what we saw pre-ban and what we saw in just 1 week of data with the Richmond sectional. 9% of the field at Richmond, 10% of the field this week did not make a top 8 as far as the sector qualifier went, or sorry, as the regional qualifier went, but really didn't do that great in many of the others. Did win a PQ, but really, really fell off as far as being able to punch through and convert from a 10% share of decks going in to a 10% or higher rate in the top 8. Sabine remains very strong with a 10% and now 15% share of the biggest tournaments. What we're seeing is that she is still punching through and converting, and is doing so on a rate that is very consistent with what she has done from set 2 on, which is to say she's 14-ish% of all top 8s or a little better. The big winner there is Qi'ra, because Qi'ra, as a soft control mid-range deck, has, and especially playing off of a 33 health base, is able in a lot of cases to stabilize and to then get to that late game that is uniquely stronger in a blue-green villainy shell than anything that really Sabine is able to put on the table. That said, a few weeks ago, I said that Sabine is the best mid-range deck. She just doesn't know it. Here we go. The largest Star Wars tournament to date had a Sabine winner on Data Vault. So had a Sabine winner on a 33 hit point base and no ECL. So taking away one of the kind of favorite tools of that deck and giving it a bigger health pool, very well piloted, very unexpected to a lot of players, I would surmise. Still punched through, and that deck didn't drop a game in top 8. So went 6-0 through the field in top 8 and did a great job of it. Heroism right now is doing better than Villainy as far as the conversion into top 8s go. You're looking at about 62% Heroism, about 38% Villainy. And then the other trend here is that Data Vault is absolutely skyrocketing. Prior to the suspension of Django, ECL was the second most commonly used base, and not even a close second. Everything in the world ran off Tarkentown. Now, out of the top 8s that we had from this week and last week combined, Data Vault has made 20 top 8s and has moved ahead of ECL at 19 and ahead of Tarkentown at 16. And so that is a big shift that we've seen. And keep in mind that when you're playing that matchup, that's an 8 health advantage. So you're talking about a full third of your base's health if you are playing on one of those 25s, a full third more getting to that. It's a big gap to cover, and I think that might be a trend that we continue to see until we start to get some correction into some 30-point bases that can manage to be a little bit tighter in their draws. There are still a couple of PQs that I said, as we're recording this, are still playing, and so some of those numbers will shift a little bit when we add those in. But you're still going to have more things that are Data Vault, because there was a top 4 that was Data Vault mirrors. So This is the Sabine Data Vault deck that won the Lille regional. As you can see here, the thing about this list is that it is 20 different 3-of cards. So draw consistency in here is going to be pretty good because you are not using anything that is a 1-of or a 2-of. What we have here is a deck that is fairly well refined towards being able to hit hard on Fighters for Freedom. It does not run the Darksaber. You do run Timely Intervention, you do run Rebel Assault, and you have plenty of good targets for those things to be able to come out and hit on. I watched this deck be played a couple of times, and being able to run through and use some lesser used cards like the Adelphi Patrol Wing, which allow you to kind of keep tempo and then play a relatively large space unit at the same time. Worked out very well. I didn't see Raidus played on stream, but that means that the largest space units that we saw come out in the finals were the Senatorial Corvette and the Patrol Wing. Most of these cards you already know. This is a kind of standard Sabine list with the additions, because you have to have 10 extra cards, with the additions of Raidus, Senatorial Corvette, Adelphi Patrol Wing, and possibly something like Ketsu Onyo. But even she's been in some lists. You're not piloting a lot of things here. Frisk is here for upgrade removal, especially for low-cost upgrades, though he can jump in and pilot. As far as Sabine is concerned, I'll take my 3 on the ground over taking my 2 on a ship. You've got a lot of things that can come out and kind of clear and that can ambush off of Timely Intervention. And then a big Swift Revel package. If you have to deal with something that is ramping or that is trying to get you to a late game, you do have Champs and Dula here in the sideboard, as well as a Crate Dragon, actually 3 Crate Dragons, which, those are just disturbing when they hit the board, especially if you manage to pull a Timely into a Crate Dragon. And then some more upgrade removal out here with the with your ships. And we know exactly how this deck operates. It's just unique in that we have a 33 HP base, piloting with Sabine. The other thing we want to mention here is that gives Sabine's clock a lot more room to operate. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that Sabine playing off of initiative into bases that have 25 health, like Quinlan Tarkentown. If I've only got 25 health on my base and you've got 25 health on my base, 1 to each of us shortens the whole game. If I've got 33 on my base and you've got 25, I really care a lot less that I am dealing 1 damage to myself to deal 1 damage to you. That's a winning proposition. And so I think that this deck is going to be a little bit more popular in the coming weeks, just because, number one, it won a regional, and imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But number 2, because I think we'll see that we have identified that a Sabine deck can be played mid-range and still has a very, very good aggressive ability. And so her ability to turn the corner is going to be very difficult to beat. This is the Data Vault deck with Qi'ra that won the Fresno PQ, the largest of them that I had data on at the time. This is very similar to the list that Wu put up on his channel. I am not going to try and pretend that I am as much of an expert on this deck as Wu is. If you want a description of how this operates, please find his video. What we want to say with Qi'ra is that you have the option here of being able to put out a leader that does a great job into most every other leader of eliminating them, especially things that wind up with 3 attack, because that just means that your Qi'ra can come out and become a 7 and have a giant barrage the next turn. There are plenty of instances where people have taken initiative early so that Qi'ra can have a big giant barrage turn and really kind of swing the game. Again, if you want a lot of information, much more than I have time for, or that I have time for here, Wu has been playing this deck and championing it since Qi'ra came out. Please watch his video. Going to leave you a little puzzle of sorts, even though I'm going to tell you the answer at the end. This is why sequencing is so important in this game. Played at a tournament today, and in a 3-0 match at table 1, I'm sitting across from a Poe deck that the previous turns I have managed to clear the Poe leader, which has been pinging me for pretty heavy damage on the ground, by deploying a Poe of my own. And at the start of this turn, what we're going to see is that I have a ECL had already been used. And so my opponent did not use ECL to bring out Wrecker, but used Wrecker to clear the Poe that I had on the ground. It's one of the last cards in hand, and so it's one of those things, if you don't want me to swing Poe, clear Wrecker out from your hand, and so that was kind of a first action. We're at a point in the game where that's just about all the resources we've got, but it's also the only card in hand. And so he's going to wind up with 20 damage against my Tarkin Town and an exhausted, no damage on it Wrecker. For me, I've only done 11. 14's a pretty big mountain to climb, especially with a Wrecker on the field with no damage. And on the board for me, I have the 2 cards that you see. I have a ready Red 5 and a ready Fighters for Freedom, and a Luke leader who has not deployed. My cards in hand were Aggression, Stay on Target, K-Turn, and the goal here is to find a path to victory this turn, because if you find a way to deal with Wrecker, you have the possibility of extending the game and probably winning the next turn without too much difficulty. So we want to talk about how we ended it now. The way that worked out, I swung the Fighters for Freedom into base rather than swinging them into Wrecker. Wound up with my next action going ahead and swinging Red 5, followed by a K-turn to ready Red 5. And since Fighters for Freedom is still on the board, having not swung into Wrecker, deals 1 extra damage to base for being played. Luke then came to Red 5, which makes that a 7 power unit, and followed up and ended that turn with playing Stay on Target, granting 2 more power to the Red 5, dealing 1 more damage from the Fighters for Freedom, and then swinging for 9. So had a huge swing on base in a single turn with a couple cards that were down on the board, and able to do that in a way that did not allow my opponent an opportunity to play a next turn, just because Wrecker Wrecker needed to be brought in so that Poe didn't just eliminate him from hand. So you can kind of play with your sequencing at times in ways that is a little bit unusual, and really make hay in this, because I dealt more like 17 damage instead of 14. But good times. Happy May 4th if you're still watching this on the 4th. If not, well, this is when it was recorded, and may the 4th be with you. Till next time, we'll see you later.